Hello, friends. Welcome to Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is supply chain shockwaves, strategies for survival and success with my friends Mark Baxa and John Delgado. How's it going, fellas?
Good morning. It's great. Good morning.
John Delgado, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Mark. Great to be here. John Delgado, CEO of FreightPath. I'm calling in from Sacramento, California. FreightPath is a online educational platform education company. We provide an LMS for companies, and we have one of the largest education supply chain depositories in the world. We specialize in international freight forwarding, domestic transport, and supply chain.
I love it. I love it. So who's your customers?
BCOs, the beneficial cargo owners, freight forward, the U.S. military, government institutions.
Yep. John, you told me a story last time you were on my podcast about why you started this company. And I believe it was because you had customers in your recruiting business who basically begged you to do. Please talk about that.
Yeah, there was just a terrible ratio. For every one open sales position, there'd be 20 to 30 open operations roles. And we were doing research and basically came to the conclusion that there was just a tremendous lack of education in this business. Tribal knowledge and passing it down wasn't working anymore. There had to be more structure and standardization. I walked away from my recruiting practice and founded FreightPath.
I love it. I love it. Mark, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning to you too, John. It's a pleasure to be with both of you today. So I'm calling from near Washington, Missouri in my home office. I am CEO of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, and I represent our 10,000 plus members and over 150,000 affiliates around the world that at some point in time call CSCMP home for supply chain knowledge, learning, development, and connections. It's my pleasure to do that. Our home office is in Lombard, Illinois. We've been established there for a number of years.
And you guys have a conference coming up here. Talk about that. We'll talk about it at the end too, but please talk a little bit about your upcoming conference.
Yeah, each year is CSCMP presents a global conference called EDGE, focused on the supply chain. And it's an ecosystem of academics, BCOs, practitioners, and certainly service providers that are all involved in the supply chain. And it's a comprehensive 5-day conference that begins with the academic research symposium and then finishes with a 3-day formal supply chain education and connection and networking conference. And we've enjoyed this really since the early 1960s. The organization was founded in 1963. So we've been around and we're relevant, and we are here to sustain supply chain professionals throughout their career. The EDGE conference is that culmination of all of our annual education that we produce, plus coming from many others in the supply chain verticals who volunteer their time to report on their findings and or their business operations so that others can learn from it.
I love it. And your conference is October 5th?
It is right, October 5th through the 8th near Maryland at the Gaylord National Harbor.
Very nice. Very nice. I'll make sure we put a link to that event in the show notes. So anyone who wants to get there can get there. I went to the last one in Nashville.
Yeah, you sure did, Joe. And I think you might have a little special story you'd like to share with the world about
Yes.
that.
That was my dumbest logistics move ever. John called me. I'm in my car driving home from Costco. I'd just gotten back from a conference, and John called and said, "Hey, Joe, you've got to come to CSCMP. You got to be there. You can moderate this round table discussion we're having, and you just got to make it." And I said, he goes, "You got to be there. You got to be there." And so he convinced me. And so I went home and I wanted to double check that I was still a member at CSCMP. It had expired. So I signed up for CSCMP. And yes, I've always been a member off and on, always get value out of it. So anyway, I booked that travel. So I would leave here, Detroit Metro, on Sunday morning. And I got down to Nashville. It was at what's it called? The Gaylord down there? It's like a city. It's unbelievably nice place for a venue for an event. So I got there, took a car over. I got there early, so I unpacked all my clothes, hung them up in the stuff that was wrinkled, hung them at the shower. Then I was like, I don't sleep well in the hotel first night. So I got my gym clothes on. I went down to the gym. I worked out hard. Then I came back, took a shower, answered some emails, and then sauntered on down to the first night of the event, Sunday, the welcoming event. And it's a huge venue. So it's walk across there, and I get there and I think it's the presidential room, and I'm looking around, I'm looking at my phone, and I don't see anybody, but it's huge. So I'm just assuming I'm not in the right place. And then I was just ready to call you, John, on the phone and say, where you at? But I pulled up the phone, I was looking at it, and a young lady walked by, and I said, hey, can you tell me where CSCMP is? She goes, they'll be right here next Sunday when their event starts. And she goes, are you just checking it out early? And I said, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, apparently you were.
And so I walked back to my room in a trance, and then I realized I got to go home. I packed in record time because I was trying to make a flight in an hour. Took one of those Escalades they have right there. Short trip. Guy who was driving said, hey, you seem a little harried. I go, yeah. He goes, what's that? What happened? I go, and I told him my stupid story, and he goes, okay. And then he goes, this is a personal question. Are you going to tell anyone? I was like, oh, that's a good point. No one has to know. He goes, that's right. I go, yeah, I'm going to tell everyone. It's a good story. So I saw him a week later.
Now you're telling the world.
I saw him a week later when I was there, and he goes, hey, what brings you back to the Gaylord? I was like, exactly. Anyway, it was worth it. CSCMP was great. That was a great story to tell. Anyway, let's talk about the shock waves. So before we hit the record button, we were prepping a little bit, and there are a whole bunch of challenges going on in the supply chain. That's what we're talking about, these shock waves. First thing I want to talk about, now let's start with you, Mark. Let's talk about the demographic issues not only the U.S. has, but the whole world has going on right now.
I think when we think about demographics, clearly the first thing that comes to mind is really talent. And it's not so much that, hey, look, we don't have talent, we're losing talent. It's really about preparedness. And if I think about the globe per se, we quickly go to how do we actually navigate the challenges that are happening around the world first and foremost? And then do we have the wherewithal to connect the pieces in a different way to solve for the constraints that we're facing? Our most recent period of time here, starting in 2018, began with the Section 301 tariffs and the disruption to the flow of goods out of China to the United States. And there were other tariffs that were put in place that affected Europe, 232 and others. But really the preponderance of that was the interplay between China and the United States. And there were fallouts that occurred elsewhere around the world as a result of that, because we had shifting supply chain, if you will, physical distribution approaches that needed to be considered. And people were trying to figure out how just to do that, because nobody really likes a sudden increase in their cost of goods by 25%. Let's face it. So the second piece of that is that then we had the war in Ukraine. And then following on that, a few years later, now we have the disruptions in the Red Sea. And then all the while, in between all of this, we had a horrific human disease hit everyone around the world, COVID-19. So from 2018 and really until where we are exactly today, because now we have a fresh round of tariffs that are stimulated by the White House, but are affecting everybody literally around the world, that supply chains now are in a spot where, are we thinking about just-in-time inventory anymore? Or are we thinking about just-in-time triage? And we're thinking about resilience in a different way. And resilience can get overused. But when I go back to the start of the question, the big basis of the question is the demographics. Is now I layer on top of that not only shifting supply chain patterns and how things are flowing, but I layer on top of that the core of everything that is needed, and that is talent capacity, talent capability to solve for problems. And the problems we face, and in supply chain, it's okay to say problems because we do solve them every day. We hope that we spend most of our time optimizing, but in reality, we probably spend more of our time tackling issues and constraints in the supply chain because there are so many different components and parts. But we always solve it. We always get there. The shelves are always stocked. We always manage that. So I want to preface what I'm about to say by that, because we do have the capacity and capability. But in the end, when I think about demographics, I think about talent. I think about the ability to stand up industries in alternative places that perhaps once were reticent in certain areas, but now need to move somewhere else. So we have a lot of things in flux at the moment, and will be like this probably for the next couple of years as we try to settle into, again, reshaping what we would perhaps like to define as normal. But right now we are in a very uncomfortable spot. Very uncomfortable.
And so, John, I want to get your 2 cents on this. And again, I know we'd had this conversation before we hit the record button. The bulk of the baby boomers are already past retirement age, the bulk of them. And they were a huge cohort. And as they leave, we look at the generations behind them. I hate the labeling, but I'll use them anyway. The Gen X and the millennials and the Gen Z. There's just not as many children as there once were. And I heard Peter Zion say this. The problem with demographics, it literally takes 30 years to create a 30-year-old. And so that's a real problem, not only in the United States. China's the fastest aging country in history. Japan is, all of Europe. So all the problems that John described, we have to somehow address with fewer people. So talk a little bit about that, John Delgado.
I think that the country is finally, especially after COVID, this new supply chain awareness. People before COVID were like, what the heck is supply chain? But now that we've identified, hey, this is a major part of the world. Without supply chain, the world stops and ceases. We're reaching back farther. So the idea of just starting someone out in supply chain education in a 4-year degree, we're looking earlier, and we're really starting to focus on high school potential supply chain STEM programs. And the other thing we're doing is looking at what's actually being taught in the 4-year university systems. And we found that a lot of it is very high level, almost in the ethereal. It's not real nuts and bolts. And it's certainly lacking from an international perspective, global scope. It's more product planning, procurement, analysis, that kind of thing. And what we're trying to do is inject bigger ideas, air import, customs, regulations, Incoterms, something as basic even as global logistics geography. You would be shocked at the amount of 4-year supply chain graduates that think Sydney's the capital of Australia. And that's an issue. So we're trying to cure a lot of things at once.
It's very interesting because I've done this podcast, almost 700 interviews, I think 700 episodes. And people always joke, I got a history degree, that's why I'm in logistics. I got a degree in French, that's why I'm in logistics. There's always some jokes about that. There's not a lot of people, especially in the older cohorts, who went through any sort of formal training. But even with formal training, like the supply chain schools, you told me a story, and maybe you can tell it again, about the TEUs. And if you're in freight forwarding, you say, what is that, 20 equivalent units? And you told me a story about it, John. Why don't you tell us again?
Yeah, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, at an event sponsored by a huge global freight forwarder, Kuna Nagel. And we had, 30, 40 supply chain students. And one of the senior VPs got up and said, here's a $100 bill if anyone can tell me what a TEU is. And not one person could stand up and define it.
Yep. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And again, I don't think there's any shame in not knowing what a 20 equivalent unit is. I didn't know what it was until I needed to know what it was. And I'm not by any means an expert, and I don't work in it day to day. But that's a little bit of the challenge.
Another part of it, though, is, and I'm starting to see movement here, which is very encouraging, is that we need to stop teaching people supply chain from a one-dimensional perspective. When you see it in a 360 view, even though you won't touch some of it on a daily basis, it still gives you a perspective, and you'll handle your relationships differently with your carriers and with everybody else that you're interacting with, because you're more empathetic. You're seeing things from their perspective, not just yours.
Yep. Yep, John, I went to CSCMP. As I told you, I went twice actually last year. But yeah, so when I was there, I flew on the plane the second time. I sat next to someone from Michigan State, a great supply chain school. But I was down there. I saw a speech from head of supply chain at Ohio State. I think I want to say Ole Miss was there. You had a ton of the top educational supply chain schools there. Talk about that, and then talk about, so in a perfect world, everyone would go through one of those programs, but that's not what's happening. So talk a little bit about that, Mark.
Yeah, so I think the starting place is we have to have a population of interested individuals in working in a multidimensional way. And that is just what John talked about. And that is looking at things from a holistic perspective. And I think the higher level, higher learning institutions that have formal supply chain programs set up our students to understand that supply chains are truly multidimensional and they cover it from all different aspects. I love the idea that CSCMP has the ecosystem of academics, perhaps the largest of all trade associations in supply chain. This is where they call their association home, and it's a wonderful thing. It's where they bring everyone from doctoral students to do their dissertations to case studies that are used in the schools, like we're talking about, like Ohio State, and leaders from these schools participate and actively engage in further downstream heuristic or practical application research for our members. I think, though, that the readiness piece of this, whether you're aiming towards a 4-year school or you're going directly to the workforce, look, the individual has that choice. Our job is to make sure that we have a prepared, competent workforce. And that's what I'd like to think about, and specifically as we've elaborated on this in this very podcast, and that is we're really talking about talent, right? We truly are. We're getting at what is it the supply chain will need today and into the future. The 4-year schools have a tremendous play in all of this, but not everybody's going to touch that. So how do we ensure that we have capability in the supply chain? We have the knowledge of how supply chains work. Whether you're headed towards a 4-year school, you're in it, you've graduated from it, and you're now in a career, or you're at the high school level and you want to know just what are my options on the road ahead? What does it mean to go work for a company that's a core manufacturer or someone that's a distribution company or a warehousing company? And I could go on. Or you choose to drive an 18-wheel semi-truck. All of these are great professions and great opportunities on the road ahead for people to engage in various parts of the supply chain. The ecosystem of learning is continual. It's 360 degrees. It's continually evolving in supply chain. You can't hold still and say, I got everything I need on Monday, because Friday is going to be completely different. Something else is going to come at you, whether you're in role or you're aspiring to your next role, or you're looking for a career or career change. All of this is part of the ecosystem of learning. But our 4-year schools, our high schools now, we believe have a footprint in supply chain, and certainly our association and our partnership with FreightPath to continually educate those that are in roles and aspiring to the next role. All of this is part of that continuous ecosystem of learning.
If I could add something to this, is I'm all for the supply chain schools. I've talked to Penn State, I've talked to Michigan State, I've talked to MIT. Great programs, lots of great programs out there. I think any parent who's put kids through college knows how wildly expensive it is. And it's also 4 years, and you have to be ready to be a student for 4 years or maybe 5 years. And one of the challenges to that is not everybody is 18 years old with mom and dad saying, hey, honey, pick any school you want and you go there and I'll just write that check every quarter and life is good. There's a lot of people who are going to say, hey, I'm 25 years old. I can't go back to school. I already have a house. I have responsibilities. Or maybe they're a truck driver and they say, I want to advance my career beyond driving a truck. John, talk a little bit about that other piece of the population. I'm going to say it's the larger part of the population that isn't headed off to one of the great supply chain schools that's out there.
Sure. Some of the best conversations I have on a weekly basis are with people who graduated in underwater basket weaving and other European 17th century European literature, and they thought they'd get a job pretty fast. and they're working at Starbucks or they're at Target and they're a little bit depressed. And I'll have these conversations, like I say, on a weekly basis. And I start talking to them about supply chain. There's a huge need. What is that? What does that touch? And I start to paint that picture. And it's just a great pleasure. You see their eyes light up and they're like, unbelievable. But how could a person like me ever get into that? And it's like, funny you should ask. What's really great about our program and the collaboration with CSCMP is the market intelligence we're able to push back and forth. And that's enabled us to really refine this program that we're going to be bringing to market later this year. And that's the ideal candidate is someone, what I'll call middle-aged, 25 to 40, unhappy in their current job, waffling along. They can come in, actually do this at the 6-month level. They've got enough to be dangerous where they can go right into a job. What we're finding now is a lot of companies, once they know a student is in our program, they'll go ahead and hire them in the beginning and get them going as long as they're still going through the program. And
Yeah.
we love it.
It's like the apprenticeship programs of old.
Very similar, but moving much faster. Everything moves much faster now.
Yep. Mark, talk about this for a minute. I experienced this in my own career. I started off working at 19. I was a draftsman. I worked in automotive. I drew parts while I went to school at night. And I'd done a year of college under my belt my first year, but I worked. By the time I left automotive 20 some years later, there wasn't more draftsmen and everything. We'd all moved everything into the CAD systems. And so we just saw basically in industry, it's not like the work didn't get done. It's just the job function no longer exists. And I think that's a part of a world we live in. And I think AI is going to accelerate that. I think there's going to be somebody who has a good job today who suddenly finds themselves maybe out on a limb saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to do another 25 years of that. So talk about those mid-career and again, I do believe we're going to see industries transformed and the job functions suddenly be gone.
And I agree, Joe. Thank you. That's a really great question. So I liken this, and I'm going to build the footing on a book that Yossi Sheffi published in May of 2023 from MIT, and it's the magic conveyor belt, right? And he talked about the intersect of the human workforce and artificial intelligence and machine learning in the road ahead. I know that there are thoughts that, oh my gosh, the world of human workforce is going to change. Robots are taking over, all this kind of stuff. So let's set that aside. The smart supply chain professional and those desiring to get into supply chain have an amazing opportunity here. And here's what I mean by that. You've got a way to work now smarter, more effectively, and more efficiently than you ever have before. So learn its capability. Learn what you can. If you're in a role that writes policy and procedures, why would you not be partnering with artificial intelligence to help you do that work? On the other hand, if you're in a manufacturing environment and you have robotics that are entering your assembly line and they're capable of learning, adaptive learning along the way, really smart, you're going to have to learn how to coexist with that and operate those and lead ahead so you have setting up the right system. The world is going to change for sure of how we do work, but it doesn't mean that you don't have work to do. One of the first things I would say is learn and adapt, be better and sharper at it, because your next nearest competitor who wants the job you're in or you're aspiring to go look for that same job, they're going to be learned. They're going to be somewhat knowledgeable on how to do this. So to the extent that you can. So learn that. That's number one, is you have to get in it. Don't be afraid of it. Just tackle it, learn it, understand it to the best of your ability. Second piece is, no doubt in my mind, that the chiefs tell us two things. Chiefs of supply chain tell us two things. One is that there's still liability and risk in some of this, whatever that might be, whether it's the intelligence gathering and where did the AI engine get this from? And then second part is that the application. So solutions-based output from adaptive machine learning, artificial intelligence, can it be executed? Is it in fact executable for a lot of different reasons, whether it be legal or otherwise? But just, is it going to achieve the ultimate outcome? Now, here comes the inherent knowledge that's needed on the human side. Some of the stuff that John was talking about is preparedness and what you got into on the 4-year schools, Joe. All of this plays into this. And the bottom line is that CSCMP is here to help. This is going to sound like an advertisement, but it's not. We're a not-for-profit. We are here to help supply chain professionals succeed by educating and developing them throughout their career. So as things evolve, we're adapting our learning and intelligence that we're providing to our membership. But you can't start without understanding and always thinking through what are the basics, what are the fundamentals. It's like baseball, right? It's hitting and catching, pitching. So here it's all about procurement, planning, logistics and distribution, manufacturing, customer service. How do you know how these functions align? What's important about each function and what it does, how it connects to the function before and after? And even planning is connecting into engineering, right? That's where the very first output is going to begin. How to plan for new products that are hitting the manufacturing process on the road ahead, and then everything else that aligns. So the bottom line for me is that as AI and machine learning evolves, you have to stay really sharp on how the supply chain functions, the elements and the important functional aspects of each function itself must remain as a part of your intelligence gathering. How to do it better? What do I need to know? What don't I know? What are my gaps? So that you can adapt better as things evolve.
Absolutely. And again, I do believe, I've heard people say, you won't be replaced by AI, you'll be replaced by somebody using AI. And I do believe that. But I will also say, I believe we've seen it already, and we're going to see more of it. I watched a job that paid really good money when I was young evaporate. We're going to see a lot more of that. I think the pace of change is going to increase with AI. It's not just AI, there's a lot of other reasons. And so we're going to find people mid-career who say, I have the degree in blank, but I don't have a career. How do I get there? And I can tell you this, I went to school from age 19 to age 38 at night to get my undergrad and my master's. It's not a good plan. We got to get people mid-career who might have a wife, might have kids, might have a husband, whatever you might have. And you got to be able to say, I need to transition fast. John, talk a little bit about that. Why don't you talk about the program that you and CSCMP do? You guys are collaborating. So talk about that collaboration. What is CSCMP doing? And then what is FreightPath doing?
In our collaboration, we have taken what they specialize in, which is the supply chain side, and married it with what we're specializing in, which is domestic and international forwarding, to create one program. And we're making it super easy for people to take at their own pace. It's deployed on our LMS, which can be accessed on their cell phone, so they can do it on the fly. If they're working another job, they can do it on their lunch break. They can do it anywhere, and it's super easy.
I call it just-in-time learning.
It is just-in-time learning. But what we love about it is, I mean, I won't bore you with details, but our system's pretty advanced, so we get a lot of analytics. We can figure out where they enjoy spending their time learning. We can see where the bottlenecks are and where they need reinforcement, and really prepare them and stand them up strong to get going and be a force to be reckoned with. It's exciting.
So how applied is what you're doing? So let's just say right now somebody's listening and they say, I have a little warehousing company and I need to educate some people, or I want to help them advance so they can help my company grow. Do you have stuff that's warehousing, or is it?
We do. And everything we have is very nuts and bolts. So, you're looking at risk management, you're looking at processes, you're looking at hiring practices to staff up a warehouse, that type of situation. On the trucking side, they're dispatching, insurance requirements, interstate regulations. Again, it's very nuts and bolts.
So there's no pie in the sky here.
No. In the SC Pro Fundamentals program, which is our most comprehensive 8-module course program, if somebody in your example, Joe, comes to us and says, look, I have a workforce inside my warehouse operations and I want to help. I need help upskilling them, understanding the competencies that they need, but also how they connect. We can easily enlist them into the SC Pro Fundamentals Warehouse Operations module. And we have companies that do that. Same thing with transportation, planning, procurement. All the functions of supply chain are represented. some people just think they need it. And here's what I love about what we offer, and that is we can start with something called the SC Pro Assess Model, which is an assessment of 40 questions that cuts across all disciplines and has a way to determine where your gaps are by the way you answer the questions. So even though you have a workforce in your warehouse and you think they need training, they might all score pretty well on that, but where they're deficient is the logistics side, or the transportation side, I should say. And that may be a gap in your operations. And of course, warehouses do all serve the front end of the transportation sector, which is loading that vehicle. So you may need to understand a little bit more of that. So we can help point out where the gaps are. And it doesn't matter whether you're a junior college using the program or a 4-year school, high school, or you're in operations, like in the case of your example, a warehousing company. We can custom design what you need to take based on the areas of opportunity you feel that your workforce needs to be upskilled in.
Mark, you mentioned your program is called
SC Pro.
And that gives you the fundamentals. Now, do I get a certificate or anything if I pass that?
Great question. Almost a miss on my part. Thanks for calling that out. You do. So when you've completed the 10-hour course and you sit for the exam, which is proctored either digitally or live, and you pass, you will receive a certificate of accomplishment. And you can post that on your LinkedIn profile, attach it to your resume, however you like to use it. But that's a lifelong accomplishment you can take with you.
Yep. I got to say, this is my feeling about the world. I look at the supply chain. It's massive, obviously. So there's all sorts of different supply chains. I just talked about the CPG supply chain on my podcast. And then when I look at supply chain as the dog and the tail is the logistics. Not that it's not important, but it's a catch-all. There's a lot of warehousing in there. There's over-the-road transportation. There's freight forwarding. There's a whole bunch of technologies. And the nature of our careers is nobody has the opportunity to work at Procter & Gamble, then at a logistics company, then at a warehousing company, then a tech company. That's rare. What ends up happening is you're in one part of the supply chain and you don't fully understand what happens upstream or downstream, and that limits your career.
And I think that's where we do break that ice, not where we can, we do. We help industry veterans early in career, students or individuals getting ready to enter their career for their first time, understand how the supply chain works, functions, and how to know when you've achieved a level of performance that meets expectations. So there is a way to speed things up. You just have to invest a little bit and spend some time educating yourself. And as John indicated, our courses are all digitally applied. You take them at your own pace and sit for the exam when you're ready based on the completion of the course. So you have the opportunity to learn as you go and learn as you grow, if you will.
Yep. And I think it's really a well-respected organization. So when you have that CSCMP certificate, what's it called? What's the name of the program? SC Pro?
SC Pro Fundamentals. And then we also have an advanced program called SC Pro Certification. And that's about a year-long study to become certified.
I like it. And John, your aspect is international.
We have 3 programs. Our first one is Freight Forwarding Career Readiness. Our second one is Importer Exporter Career Readiness. And our third one is Introduction to Supply Chain for secondary schools.
Yep. Yeah. And I think we talked for a long time before we hit the record button today. We have a lot of different issues that are happening. Obviously, the tariffs. And I think the tariffs, I'm not an expert in any of this, but from what I understand, the tariffs are going to be used to reposition supply chains. They're going to be moving around a little bit. Some of them might be moving from China. China is no longer the lowest cost provider. So we might be moving a supply chain from China to Vietnam or Panama or who knows where. And we need basically experts also those as we move stuff here. As stuff moves here, we still need more people who understand this business at the nuts and bolts level. And I remember I ran a little logistics company. It was a turnaround. Great company. Loved working there. And we're 45 minutes from Michigan State. And I remember the owner said to me one time, Michigan State's got this top supply chain school. Why don't you hire some guys out of there? And I called them and they wouldn't send anyone over because we didn't have any jobs that paid enough initially. And I remember thinking, God, there's got to be somebody. These were, I won't get into the numbers because they're not important now, but it reminded me that I can't afford an entry-level guy out of that school, even though the guys I did hire at a school, they were finance guys and they did really well in their careers. But they didn't get the fundamentals before they got there. They learned on the job. And that's a tough way to go. It's tough for the company and it's tough for them. So anyway, Mark, and wrap this bad boy up, put a kind of a big old bow on this one. I'm going to talk about some of the things we talked about. Then I want to get your final thoughts on it. Mark first, and then I want to hear from John. So again, we're seeing big shockwaves in the supply chain, and the solution is always the same. It's getting better talent. It's educating your talent. And so we're seeing the tariffs from this current administration. I think we're going to see that regardless of the administration. We are moving our supply chains out of China. 50% of all supply chain functions today are in China. We're going to move those around. They're not the low-cost provider they once were. We're also going to be moving stuff here. At the same time as we're doing all this, we have a demographic problem. The boomers are leaving the field, and there's not enough people having kids. And even if they start having kids today, it's still 30 years before you're a 30-year-old productive adult. So we need to be able to educate people who are mid-career or just starting their career. We'll meet you where you're coming from, is what you guys said. And that education can't take forever. That education can't be theoretical, and it can't cost $100,000. Not everybody has that. So all these challenges, the stuff that's gone all that's driving us all crazy since COVID, are still there. We just need to figure out a way to get our workforce educated. Put a big old bow on this one, Mark Baxa, and then I'll let you do that, John.
Nothing like asking a really easy question. Joe, thank you. No, it's great. And I've enjoyed this podcast, really have. So tying a bow on this is that we're definitely going to have to move through a state of, if you will, self-induced, in many cases, disruption. All right. So like it or not, this is where we are. And there are parties who are creating this that have their reasons. So how do we respond? So we could certainly challenge the fact that they're even in place, such as new tariffs that are coming on. And that's for a certain part of society to rectify and manage through. But the important thing is, how does the supply chain respond? And that's your question. Do we have the talent to do it? And what does the road ahead really truly look like? I would say and I don't want to just say there's one solution. There's not. But it's certainly diversification needs to be looked at, and every industry has a mix of capability to do that from a cost, performance, and delivery perspective, but more importantly, talent and workforce readiness. So there are certain industries you're not going to move to certain parts of the world because the workforce isn't ready, or there are infrastructure issues, et cetera. So this requires continual comprehensive study in order to understand how the footprint of my business needs to look on the road ahead and how quickly can I get there. Because as you mentioned, 30-year-olds take 30 years to get there, but more importantly is that to achieve the same level of quality we're accustomed to out of countries like China, and we now need to move somewhere else, takes time. And the reliability of that quality has to be tested to ensure it's met each and every time. Otherwise, you know what happens to the business model. Somebody else will do it better and you'll be out. The other part of this, and you mentioned talent, is we all have a stake in this. We all have a reason that we exist. And as CSCMP, no matter where businesses choose to do business, we want to be that inside resource to help you ensure you have the skill sets in your workforce to achieve the output you're looking for from a supply chain, whether that's planning, procurement and sourcing, manufacturing, logistics and distribution, customer service, and even some of the other supporting functions we can get at through our membership around the world to help each other, whether that's a formal educational program or semi-formal like the SC Pro Fundamentals or SC Pro International that we're branding with John Delgado's program, or it's certification, or if it's ongoing learning and development, it's just news of the day and how each other are reacting to that, because we need to learn from each other as well. So that's our role. That's our role in all of this. But to say that all of a sudden we'll snap our fingers and all this will be solved tomorrow, not going to happen. So there are indicators we need to look at. And are there safe havens and safer places to go? Maybe. Depends on how the back office or I should say back channel conversations go between some of the other countries that haven't yet made the news with the White House in terms of tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and other tariff related type discussions that are yet to occur. The other thing I'll say, and I'll end on this, is that I think the trade community, the professionals that have been trade in compliance and the international supply chain have waited for their time in the sun when they get called to the C-suite to say, how are we going to solve these problems? So my advice to those folks is don't be the party of no, be the party of let me see what options I can present. Because it's easy to say the rules and regulations don't allow this or they allow that. Be thoughtful as you approach this because you're a vital part of the supply chain, always have been, but now you're in the forefront. So if you need help, CSCMP can help solve for those challenges that you may have in terms of what you need to know on the road ahead, whether it's collaborating with others or it's a formal education program.
Yeah. While we're talking about that we've talked a lot about what CSCMP can do for education, but I went to CSCMP Edge actually twice. And there's a lot of networking going on there. There's a lot of business done. So this isn't just about going to class. It's about doing business. So please talk about some of those opportunities while we're talking about CSCMP.
Sure, Joe. Thanks for that. The networking piece is an opportunity for people to build not only relationships with others that have perhaps solved some similar challenges you now face, but those that can be advisors to you on the road ahead. Look, you need to look outside the four walls of your business. Let me just comment on this really quick. SHRM is a wonderful organization that stands for HR policy and people development. I get it. And we talk a lot about the 70-30-10 model or 70-20-10 model. 70% of the learning you need to know is on the job, 20% through mentoring and coaching, 10% through external learning. I think in supply chain, it's not quite that way. It's probably 60% on the job, 20% mentoring and coaching, and the remainder then would be external learning because this is a fast-paced, evolving part of how we get things to market. That's the supply chain. And that networking piece that takes place at the Edge conference draws all of that out. You have a chance to really connect with people that you can't get on the internet. So you can talk to some of the Fortune 100 company representation that you ordinarily couldn't connect with if you're a small, medium enterprise. We provide that ecosystem. The same thing with academia and service providers, because we all solve the problem together, not as individuals. And that's what the Edge Conference does.
So, John, I want to give you the chance to talk final thoughts, but while maybe you could incorporate this into your answer is moving freight, building factories, having all the jobs within supply chain, super important. But one of the things I noticed, we have a lot of silos in this business, and we have a lot of people who are capable of doing what they're told, which is important, obviously. But now, especially if you're in the logistics space, people are coming to you and saying, hey, what about what's going on in the Suez Canal? What about these tariffs? You now have to have, in my mind, a higher level of knowledge of the world and of business and of compliance and trade, import, export that is well beyond, I'll move your freight. So I think there's a lot of people listening to my podcast who are in logistics and they think of themselves as, oh, I'm the supply chain. You're a very small part of the supply chain. And I think this is why these programs are important, because to have the supply chain work the way it's supposed to with that really nice, even flow, we need to break down those silos, but also to be the professional that you want to be when somebody, a shipper, calls and says, hey, what about this? You got to be the consultant rather than the guy who says, well, I didn't think you were going to ask me that. I thought you were going to say pick up freight. So please talk about that. I don't know if it's a consultative approach that we all want to get to, and how do we get there?
So one thing that we're constantly doing is absorbing market intelligence and turning it into learning paths that meet people where they are. So if you've got someone in a certain segment of supply chain and they have historically had little to do with, let's say, anything brokerage or tariff related, and now it's in their face, we have learning paths that they can quickly embark on that will skill them up very quickly and actually keep them ahead. And that's really become a large part of what FreightPath does, is working with this amazing organization, CSCMP. They're our chief collaborator. And the market intelligence that we get, we're able to turn that into action. And that action is courses, new courses, but more than that, these pathways that I'm talking about that are guiding people. And then what people don't see is everything behind the wall, which is all the software making everything happen, all the analytics that the candidates have access to, where they can be like, oh, wow, I really seem to excel here. I'm great at it. Maybe I should point my career a little bit more in this direction. So, yeah, a lot going on, a lot of moving parts.
I think one of the things, every once in a while, you'll see the article that says you will have 7 career changes. And I can say this gray hair, I've had big career changes. I left automotive, which I knew very well, and I came into logistics. And I remember being in a logistics company, and I would ask the owner of the company, we're a logistics company, right? He goes, yeah. I said, what else is logistics besides LTL and truckload? And he goes, well, lots of stuff like rail and airplanes and ships, and that's about it. And I remember asking people that for years in the space. I finally ended up writing a little white paper about what is logistics. The vast majority of people in our business can tell you a lot about the silo they're in. They're an inch wide and a mile deep. And our supply chain partners, whoever they are, want us to be, they love that we're a mile deep, but they don't want us to be an inch wide. Maybe you could be a foot wide and a mile deep. So we can actually understand what's going on upstream and downstream of what we're doing.
Education changes all of that.
It sure does.
Yeah. And I think what's also nice is I use the term just-in-time education. And the reason I think that's so important is universities are always updating what they're doing, but that's not a good path for everybody. It's maybe if you're 18 to 22, and I know they have continuous education stuff, but I think CSCMP and FreightPath are saying, oh, hey, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on with tariffs. Let's do a course on tariffs. It'll be there real quick if that's a concern in our business. And we talked so much about, we saw some parts of our supply chain were a little brittle during COVID, and now we talk about resilience all the time. It's something that all of a sudden became front and center in our business. AI used to be a pipe dream. Now we're using it every day. And by the way, we use the slick title we have here today, Supply Chain Shockwaves. That was from AI. I guarantee you guys are going to be playing around with some AI courses. And I think that's
coming. If I may say one more thing, we're in talks right now with a very cool company called Accredible. And Accredible's software would sit right alongside our LMS. And what it does is it lays out all of the learning paths with the badges and the certificates. And that program, those badges and certificates and detail behind it, follow a person throughout their entire career. They can quickly email it to an employer. They can post it on their LinkedIn profile. They can tweet about it. They can make a TikTok video about it. But everything who they are substantively as a supply chain operator is on a silver platter, and what they've done, their accomplishments. And we're finding that companies are very interested in this because they can have a hand in guiding them and saying, oh, you haven't done this career path. Why? We'd like to pay for that for you. We'd like you to do this. And companies actually use it now as a planning tool with their existing workforce, which is pretty cool.
Mark, if somebody says, I'm listening to Joe's podcast, and yes, I want to do something with CSCMP. By the way, I just rejoined CSCMP. I re-upped. You're most welcome. Thank you. Very affordable. And you have all sorts of programs going on. Talk about some of those programs and who's eligible to join.
Everybody, whether you're in the formal supply chain role or a student of supply chain or not, is welcome to join. We are the association for all who have interest in engaging in supply chain learning and development, and certainly connecting with others. So all are welcome. The program is designed at the membership level for where you are in your career, whether you're a student, you're in the military, you're in transition, international, ex-US, or you desire certain levels of membership that give you access to the EDGE conference at discounted rates. Every member has access to our online learning content. Every member has access to our brand new North Star newsletter, which keeps everybody current on things and happenings in supply chain that you need to know and to remain relevant, and our entire ecosystem of learning. The formal education that we talked about, Joe, the SC Pro fundamentals, that is in addition to a membership, but they're very affordable. But we have a complete portfolio of learning and then connecting and educating possibilities for supply chain professionals. And in addition to Edge, by the way, we have over 100 roundtables around the world where you can engage locally, and those are growing all the time. We're increasing each and every month. So we're bringing all of our digital learning, all of our papers, our work products, our research, everything that we're doing right to the local level to the best of our ability to create wide and unabridged and unencumbered access.
I love it. I love it. Now, is there a membership? Is that an individual or can companies join also?
We have both. We have an a la carte menu for corporations and companies of different sizes, as well as individual membership. We were founded as an organization for individual members, and we still take our corporate members and count them as individuals as well. But yes, you can join as a corporation, a company, or as an academic institution, certainly as an individual as well.
Yep. So, John, am I going to have access to all of the stuff we discussed about the international freight forwarding program and all that through CSCMP?
Yes, it'll be available on their platform and ours.
Excellent. Excellent. So, one more time, we have CSCMP Edge is coming up October 5th through the 8th. And is that in Baltimore?
It's in Maryland. National Harbor, Gaylord.
Okay. National Harbor. Where's that at?
It's just outside the outskirts of Washington, D.C.
Okay. So it's a little closer to D.C. than to Baltimore. All right. Very nice. Very nice. We can all go visit our elected representatives and see where our money's going.
There you go. Exactly.
So anyway, what I'll do, I'll make sure I put a link to each one of your LinkedIn profiles, each one of your websites, and any other links you give me. So if you guys could give me a link to some of those things you mentioned, the North Star newsletter, that would be great. Any of these courses that we just discussed, I would love to put in there. And I think this is so important. And again, I think it's also just so overlooked. We have so many people in the world who are looking for a meaningful career. And I think the idea of going back to college, maybe you have a family, maybe you're 50 years old and you're like, I don't have time to do this. But I think there's a lot of people in our business, John, you mentioned earlier, who said, I got a degree in 18th century French literature and I want to be a supply chain professional. You obviously have the ability to write and communicate, but learn about the supply chain. We need good supply chain people. The only way we're going to get them is to develop them. And one other thing before I forget, we didn't touch on it too much. We're educating people right out of high school too, right?
Correct.
That's correct.
One more time. I know we're supposed to be wrapping up. John, talk about the high school programs, and then Mark, I want to hear from you.
It's still in development. We're at the tail end of giving it a name. And then what we're really trying to do right now, there's a lot of political topsy-turvy out in the market, is we're trying to figure out how to best position it. And at what point do we bring companies into the equation to help? But what we're really trying to do is not just establish the program itself in high schools for juniors and seniors, but creating a back-end career center. So it's a pipeline. They complete the program, they go into the career center, and then the membership of CSCMP, the corporate members, would be able to have access to those recent graduates. That's really where we're trying to head with it.
I love it. I love it. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time and telling us about CSCMP and FreightPath and all the exciting new educational opportunities that you guys are bringing. And again, I think we need it. The solution is always the same. It's get good people, educate your people. This is the only answer. It's always been the only answer.
Joe, I think that's very important, and thank you for having us. The one thing I'll add is that we formed a not-for-profit, a 501c3 called the CSCMP Talent Center, and John alluded to that. And this is our foundation that we've set up for tax-deductible contributions so that we can take our educational content and provide it not only to high schools, but underserved and overlooked populations of adults. that help get them into an affordable curriculum. In many cases, it would be provided free. So we are open to doing things in just about every different possible way, possible channel to get people what they need to be able to aspire to a career in supply
We
chain.
can't afford to have anybody sitting on the sidelines. That was, again, as a baby boomer, tail end of the baby boom, there was a ton of us. It didn't matter if everybody went to work because there wasn't enough jobs for us at the time. Now we have the opposite problem. And I know there's people who are listening to my podcast saying, for God's sakes, Joe, I'm looking for work, but there is sometimes a skill mix. It's a mismatch. That's always going to be a problem. But what you alluded to, Mark, is there's people who are working somewhere and think, I want meaning. I want to have a better career. I don't want to be a drive and lift or doing manual labor. How do I get myself into a professional job? This is the route.
This is the route. We're here to help them do that. Exactly.
Thank you both so much for taking the time.
Such a pleasure. Great to see you, Joe.
Yep, thank you. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.